Hey everyone, I'm Mr. Skeleton. Today we've got 12 disturbing stories about abandoned houses exploration in the Appalachian Mountains. But before we start, please make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and you can change your mind later. And if you've got any ideas for what the next video should be, feel free to drop them down in the comments. I was 29 when it happened. There's this old house out near Harrow Ridge, close to the boundary line of the old game reserve, where my cousin Nolan and I used to mess around when we were kids. We'd go out there with BB guns and half-packed lunches and come back scratched up, covered in pine sap, thinking we were trackers or something. The house, we always just called it the Vero place, was a sagging two-story half-eaten by woods. Everybody in town knew about it, but no one really knew anything about it. Some said the Vero family owned it, but I never met a single person who could tell me who they were. It had been boarded up since before I was born, never fixed up, never crumbled down either. Just stuck there like it was waiting for someone to notice. Nolan came down from Asheville in early December. He was on one of those burnout breaks from work, restless, bouncing off the walls, and halfway through a case of Miller Lite most nights. 2 days in, he started bringing up the Vero house. Said he remembered it from when we were kids and thought it'd make a killer spot for a photo series. I brushed it off at first. We weren't 12 anymore, and I wasn't about to get slapped with a trespassing charge just because my cousin caught the itch for some rustic decay shots. But Nolan has this way of pushing that doesn't feel like pushing. He just keeps talking until suddenly you're halfway into something without even agreeing to it. We waited until the following Thursday, crisp, cloudless, maybe just above freezing. Packed a couple of thermoses, pulled on our heavier boots, and headed out early. The trail was rough but still walkable. The frost hadn't melted yet, so every step we took left these neat, sharp boot prints in the dead grass and frozen dirt. By the time we hit the porch, it was late morning. And the house? Weirdly intact. I mean, you'd expect busted steps, caved-in roof, maybe raccoons hanging out in the walls, but the place stood there like it had never been touched. The boards over the windows were still tight, unwarped. Even the screen door rusted, sure hung straight. I remember thinking how wrong that was, like the house was trying to be presentable. I pushed open the front door and it swung without a single creak. The entryway was bare. No old furniture, no piles of leaves or animal mess, just dust and our own boot prints. And one other set bare feet. The prints were faint but clear. Whoever left them had stood in place for a while, the heels pressed deep like they'd been waiting there. Nolan just grinned and said, "Probably some squatter," then walked right in like it was his living room. The prints led down a narrow hallway and turned left into what must have been the dining room. The boards on the windows made it dim, but light leaked through in thin slashes. The floor dipped slightly in the middle. The wallpaper was peeling, curling at the edges like dried-out paper. And on the far wall, this was what got me. There was a mirror, still hanging, still unbroken, but the glass was cloudy, like it had aged in a different timeline. I walked over out of habit. I work in renovations, so I've seen my fair share of warped old mirrors. But this one? It didn't reflect the room we were in. No boards on the windows in the image, just frost-covered glass. And when I breathed out, I saw the fog from my breath, but not in the reflection. Before I could even process that, Nolan yelled from the kitchen, "There's a second stairwell, back corner." I left the mirror and headed toward his voice. The kitchen was stripped bare. No stove, no sink, just broken counters and a weird amount of cleanliness. I mean, the walls looked like they'd been wiped down. No mold, no rodent trails, no smell. It didn't smell like anything, which somehow felt worse. We found the stairs tucked behind what used to be the pantry, narrow, steep, no railing. I followed him up with one hand on the wall. The second floor was even darker. Hall split both ways, doors on either side. Nolan was already poking around with his phone light, acting like he was cataloging ruins. I checked the nearest room. The floor was covered with clear plastic sheeting, tight at the corners like someone had taken their time laying it down. A single metal folding chair sat in the center, legs dusted with dried mud. That was it. Next room, same setup. Plastic chair, No other signs of life. By the time I hit the third identical room, my skin was starting to crawl. I went back into the hallway and told Nolan we should leave. I kept my voice even, but I was gripping the edge of my jacket hard enough to feel the seams in my palm. He didn't argue, just said, "Feel that. The air's different right here." He wasn't wrong. It wasn't warmer, exactly, but there was a change. Like the kind of stillness you feel when you close a thick door behind you. My phone still showed 11:32. No bars, no update. I turned toward the stairs again. Something looked off. The hallway behind us felt longer than before. I squinted, trying to measure the distance between doors. I'd just come out of the third one, but now it looked like it was 5 doors back. I told Nolan again, firm this time, that we needed to go. He nodded but then pointed up, 1 shot from the attic. "Just one. There's no attic," I told him. "Roofline's too shallow." He pointed again. "Square outline in the ceiling. Pull down ladder." "I swear I didn't see it before." "I'll be quick," he said, already reaching up. The ladder came down too smoothly. No dust. No sound. Nolan climbed a couple of rungs and paused. "Come up right after me," he said, not joking. "Don't want to be out there alone." I waited a second, then followed him up. The attic wasn't what you'd expect. No insulation, no boxes, no cobwebs, just smooth plywood floors, a row of filing cabinets, and a cot with no mattress. Nolan went to the cabinets. I stayed near the hatch, barely moving. My palms were slick. "These are full," he said. "Look." He opened a drawer. Inside were folders, labeled, handwritten, organized by date. I walked over slowly and read a few. The names didn't mean much at first. Then I saw one with our grandmother's surname, another with Nolan's last name, then one with mine, first, middle, last. "Nolan," I said, "we're leaving. Now." He opened the folder with my name. It was empty, except for a note written in block letters. "Observed. Time uncertain. Await return." That's when I grabbed his arm and we both climbed down fast. The house felt different. Quiet, still, like it had settled into itself. At the bottom of the stairs, I turned back. Every door we'd opened was now shut. Not just pushed closed shut clean and tight. We hadn't touched them. I asked Nolan if he noticed. He muttered, "I didn't pull down that ladder." We stepped outside. Snow had started. The light had changed. Our boot prints were gone. Not snowed, over-erased. The brush we'd pushed through on the way in looked untouched, like no one had come through in years. We didn't speak until we reached the trailhead. Nolan didn't even have his camera out. Not a single photo. When we got back to my truck, my phone finally updated. 2:26. We'd been gone an hour maybe, but the shadows on the ridge said otherwise. That night, I scrubbed my boots clean and left them out on the porch. They smelled like pine and iron, like old blood. Nolan left the next morning without saying goodbye. 3 weeks later, I drove by the Harrow Ridge entrance on my way into town. The path to the Vero place wasn't there anymore, like it had never been there in the first place. Curtis was staying with me over winter break. We'd been close back in high school, the kind of friends who didn't talk all year but could pick up right where we left off when we did. He'd moved to Asheville for work a while back, but his mom still lived up here in Clearfield, so he made the trip up every now and then. That winter, he needed a break from his apartment and asked if he could crash for a few days. I had the space. Figured it'd be good to catch up. We ended up doing what we always used to do, staying up too late, watching old movies, eating like garbage. One night we started swapping stories about local places that used to freak us out when we were kids. The usual rumors. Houses where people vanished, cabins with bloodstains no one could explain, the guy who supposedly hanged himself in the woods but was still seen chopping wood every winter. We started listing out spots we'd always been curious about. Some were long gone, others were too far off the main roads to reach with the snow as it was. Only one stood out as maybe worth trying, the old Keegan house. Now, the Keegans were always a weird footnote in town. Not in a spooky way, just quiet, insular. They'd been gone since the late 80s, and their place up on Wild Ridge had just sat there, slowly falling apart. People said it was cursed, or haunted, or just forgotten, depending on who you asked. But it was on public land now, so technically no one could stop us. Curtis got that old gleam in his eye, the same one he used to get before we snuck into the drive-in after hours or broke into the school pool. "We've got boots, flashlights, and a half day of sunlight," he said. "What more do we need?" I didn't really want to go, but I didn't want to be the one who chickened out either. We parked near the base of the ridge just after lunch. The trail up wasn't marked, just a thin line in the snow from deer or maybe hunters. Trees on either side were covered in ice, so everything looked like it had been dipped in glass. Our boots made deep, satisfying crunches with every step, and Rook bounded ahead, tail like a flag, too excited for his own good. Rook's been with me since he was 8 weeks old. Big square head, thick chest, kind of dog you'd think twice about stealing a sandwich from. But he's a sweetheart. Never met a person or animal he didn't try to befriend. It was colder than we expected. The kind of cold that sneaks into your sleeves no matter how many layers you've got on. Curtis's breath kept fogging up his glasses, and I had to keep fishing my phone out to check our direction, which meant taking my glove off again and again. Eventually, I just left it off. The house appeared suddenly, like it had been waiting for us. 2 stories, slanted tin roof, wood siding gone gray with time. The porch looked like it might collapse under a strong wind. But the windows were all intact. No boards, no broken glass. That's what got me. For a place left empty for over 30 years, it looked preserved. Curtis pulled out his phone to snap a picture. "Weird, it doesn't look worse," he said, half laughing. Rook stopped at the bottom step. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just let out this low, unsure whine, the kind he used to make when he got left behind in the car for 5 minutes. I figured he'd caught a whiff of something under the porch, a raccoon nest maybe. We stepped up. The wood groaned but held. Inside, the air was dry and cold. Dust everywhere, but not the thick kind. More like a soft coat that hadn't been disturbed in a long time. The house had that heavy, old smell. Not rot exactly, just old fabric, stale wood, a hint of something sour under it all. It looked lived in. Still, there was a couch, an upright piano with yellowed keys, some pictures on the wall, family portraits, probably the Keegans. One had been knocked sideways, like someone had brushed past it in a hurry. A calendar hung by the stairs. Curtis pointed at it and grinned. "December 1987, he said. Guess they weren't big on updates. We moved down a narrow hallway at the back. There were 2 doors. One slightly ajar, the other shut tight, with a brass key still sticking out of the lock. I nudged open the left door. It was clearly a kid's room. Faded wallpaper with little flowers curling off the walls, a metal bed frame with a lumpy mattress, toys scattered in a half-hearted line. In the corner, a single winter boot leaned against the wall, like someone had been halfway through getting dressed. Rook didn't follow us in. He stood in the hallway, eyes fixed on the closed door, tail lowered, whole body tense. That wasn't like him. Curtis stepped over and gave the knob a little knock. "Pantry?" he asked. I didn't answer. The room felt wrong. Not dangerous, just still. Still, too still. When I looked out the window, I realized we were facing a sharp ridge. At least 30 feet down to a rocky creek. No trails, no signs of movement. No way anyone was getting in or out that way. Then we heard it. A sound from the other side of the locked door. Not a knock. More like pressure. Weight shifting, then the softest creak. The key in the door turned. Just a little. Like someone inside had brushed past it. Curtis gave me this sideways glance. "That you?" Rook growled. Not a playful one. Not a playful one. Short, deep, a warning. I whispered, "Back out. Don't turn around." Curtis opened his mouth to ask why, but I pointed. The key was turning again, deliberately now. Someone was trying to open it, carefully, quietly. We backed out, slow. No sudden moves. Rook didn't budge until we passed him, then followed with stiff legs, still watching the door. Halfway down the stairs, we heard it. The door opening, not flung open, just unlatched. A creak, then a pause. Then the sound of something heavy dragging across the floorboards. Curtis grabbed my sleeve. "It's open," he whispered. We didn't run. That felt like a bad idea. We just kept moving step by step, as silent as we could. Then I turned. The hallway was empty, but the key, it was gone. Curtis stepped onto the porch and looked around. "Where's Rook?" I turned. Empty behind me. I called once, then again louder. No response. Then I heard him. Claws on old wood. Fast. Rook shot out from the hallway like he'd been fired from a cannon. Slammed into me hard enough to nearly knock me over. Tail between his legs, eyes wide, breathing hard. He shoved against me like he wanted me to pick him up, which was ridiculous. He's 60 pounds of dog. That was it. We left, didn't speak, didn't look back. We reached the road and just stood there for a while, breathing. Curtis finally broke the silence. "You saw the calendar, right?" I nodded. "It said the 28th. That's today." I hadn't noticed. I pulled out my phone to check. Dead. Fully black screen. Wouldn't turn on. Curtis checked his. Same thing. We'd both charged them that morning, barely used them. Rook wouldn't stop looking over his shoulder the whole walk back to the car. Even once we were inside with the engine running and the heat blasting, he sat between the seats facing backward. We didn't go back. I've passed that trail twice since. Once by accident, once on purpose. But I don't look up the ridge anymore. I was 27 when I'd taken a couple days off and driven back home to help my cousin Mira move out of her rental before the holidays. She was getting ready for grad school in Georgia and wanted to clear everything out. We grew up just a few miles from there, in a patch of hills near Route 46, the kind of place with gravel roads and mailboxes dented from bored teenagers with baseball bats. You can go hours without seeing another car. Most people still leave their doors unlocked. Some of our neighbors still have landlines, and I'm not talking about nostalgic vintage ones. Actual rotary phones plugged into the wall because cell service is that bad. Mira had been living in this single-story place for about 2 years. It was nothing special, just a beige rental with a carport, probably built in the 80s. No weird vibes, no strange neighbors. But the house next door had always been a different story. It sat lower on the slope, kind of sunken into the hill, with trees creeping up around it like the woods were trying to take it back. Nobody mowed the yard, no curtains in the windows. Most of them were broken anyway. The roof sagged in the middle, and some parts of the siding were just gone, ripped off, or rotted through. Every kid in town knew that house. We all called it the Shell. It didn't look abandoned in a haunted way, just vacant, hollow, like something had lived there and then got scraped out, but the shape remained. The land records said it still belonged to the same family who originally owned all the property. Nobody lived in it, but nobody ever came to tear it down either. It just sat there, waiting. The night Mira and I finished loading the U-Haul, we stood on her porch drinking those thin, too sweet gas station cocos, the kind that always smell better than they taste. The air was quiet, just the soft hiss of snow starting again, building up in the glow of the porch light. I glanced toward the Shell and said, almost without thinking, "I want to see inside that place before I head out." Mira gave me this look, half tired, half amused. "You're kidding," I shrugged. "Come on, we're already here. Don't you want to know what's in there?" "Absolutely not," she said, but handed me her flashlight anyway. "It's in the glove box. Use that. The floors are probably rotted out." We pulled on our coats and stepped off the porch. The snow was only an inch deep, but it formed that icy crust that cracks under your boots. The house looked worse up close. Back door was hanging by one hinge, so we went around the front instead. Mira tested a board on the porch with her heel before stepping on it. Inside, it was cold, but not just winter cold. It had that stillness, like a closed-up freezer you forgot about in the garage. Nothing moved. The air felt heavy in my nose and ears. The flashlight buzzed softly in my grip. Weak batteries. It cast this dull yellow beam that didn't reach far. We stepped into a short hallway, 3 doors, 2 on the left, 1 on the right. First room on the left was basically rubble. A rusted metal bed frame, a busted mirror hanging on a single nail. You could see where raccoons had probably nested at some point. The wallpaper had peeled halfway down the wall and was clinging there like a torn sticker. Second room was worse. Piles of damp insulation and an old dresser that looked like someone had taken a crowbar to it. Nothing else. Just the kind of mess that makes you want to sneeze. But the third room, the one on the right, looked different. Clean, for one thing. No debris, no mold, no broken glass. Floorboards were worn but intact. The window was closed, no drafts. And in the middle of the room, facing the window, was a plain wooden chair. Not broken, not dusty. Just sitting there like it belonged. Over the back of the chair was a gray wool coat. Not antique, not interesting, not interesting. Just ordinary. Something you'd grab last minute from a clearance rack. That's what made it feel so off. It didn't belong here. Mira stepped beside me, quiet now. "That's not from here," she said. "Nope." She leaned forward and touched the coat lightly with her fingers, then paused. "It's warm." I blinked. "What?" "I'm serious." "The lining. It's warm, like somebody just took it off." I reached out and brushed the fabric. She wasn't wrong. It didn't feel cold. We both froze when we heard it. A faint creak from somewhere behind us. Not loud, not sharp. Just enough to be noticed. Like the sound an old house makes when it shifts. But we were at the end of the hallway. No attic above, no basement below. Nothing should have been behind that wall. The flashlight flickered slightly as I scanned the paneling beside the chair. There it was, almost hidden in the grain of the wood, a narrow slit running top to bottom, no wider than my palm. A latch up top, a little circular hole where a knob might have been. If you weren't looking, you'd miss it completely. Mira's hand closed around my arm. "Don't open that." I nodded. "Okay." Then I opened it. It didn't move at first, swollen in place. Then it jerked loose and creaked inward. A rush of cold air hit my face. I raised the flashlight and saw more space. A whole room that hadn't been on the outside of the house. Longer than it should have been. It extended deep way past what the exterior layout allowed. The walls were the same wood paneling. The carpet was faded blue shag, matted and discolored. The air smelled musty, but not dead, just old. And at the far end of the room, maybe 20 feet in, was a second chair, occupied. A man sat in it, still, upright, arms on his thighs, boots planted flat, like a mannequin set down carefully. The beam of light hit his face. He didn't move. His clothes were modern, clean, gray work pants, flannel shirt buttoned up, leather boots that still had polish. His head tilted slightly, just enough to register as odd. Like he was waiting for someone to finish a sentence. Mira whispered, "Back up." I didn't. I stepped forward once. That's when his eyes opened. Not startled, just open, calmly, like he'd been awake the whole time. His gaze locked onto the light. No squinting, no flinching, just staring, unblinking. My throat went dry. I stepped back, and he stood. No lurch, no effort, just up. Mira grabbed my jacket and yanked. "Go." We didn't look back. Slammed through the door, across the snow, Mira slipping once on the porch steps, palms scraped on the concrete. We piled into our truck and locked the doors, chest heaving, eyes locked on the dark silhouette of the house. No one followed, no face at the window. But we stayed there a long time. Long enough for the windshield to frost again. Long enough for my fingers to go numb inside my gloves. Eventually, we drove to the gas station down the road and parked under the lights. We stayed there until sunrise, watching the shadows shorten and the snow slow. A few days later, her neighbor, Mr. Holloway, the retired guy across the street, said he saw someone in the second floor window of the shell just after midnight. He was sure of it. Same room, same window. He didn't call anyone. That spring, the land was sold off. The developer bulldozed both houses, Mira's and the shell, but no one's built anything on that lot since. My cousin Silas had come across this old plat map during one of his deep dives into rural property archives. It marked 4 structures along a discontinued logging road way out near Caraway Hollow in Darnell County. 2 of the buildings didn't show up on any satellite imagery, which immediately made it more interesting to him. The other 2 had caved-in roofs, barely visible outlines among the trees. He was the kind of guy who got excited about forgotten corners and half-erased names on a map. We borrowed a 4-wheeler from a guy he knew, snow chains already fitted, and packed light. A couple of thermoses with coffee, thick gloves, and 2 of those high-lumen flashlights that could cut through fog. No food, which turned out to be a mistake, but at the time, we figured we'd be back in a few hours. The first place we came to was a skeleton. You could tell it had once been a house, 4 corners, a little porch, chimney slanted and moss-covered, but there wasn't much left. The roof had folded in, and the walls were bowed out like a cardboard box left in the rain. We stopped anyway. Silas snapped some photos, and I poked around in what used to be the kitchen. A few cracked plates were frozen into the dirt. The second place wasn't much better, but it had one upright room. Looked like a shed or a canning space. Nothing inside except a broken chair and a bucket of unrecognizable rust. We didn't stay long. The third building was farther uphill, past this bend where the trail split between 2 ridges. It looked different immediately. Intact, not pristine, but holding its shape. Silas grinned when he saw it, said it looked like it belonged in a ghost story, but in a good way. Hunting cabin maybe, or a logger's halfway stop. The siding had faded to silver, and a couple of the windows were blocked with mismatched boards, like someone had tried to patch it up with whatever they had lying around. The door wasn't locked. It opened fast, like the pressure changed as soon as I turned the knob. I remember that moment clearly because it felt off, not threatening, just wrong in a way I couldn't place. Like walking into a room that should be warm and finding it ice cold. Inside, it was somehow colder than outside. No insulation, just bare, weathered wood and a slanting floor. One room. A small black wood stove in the corner, a desk bolted to the back wall, and a metal cot with no mattress, just bare springs and a few spots of rust. No sign of animals, no nests, no insects, no footprints, even in the places where the dust should have settled. It wasn't clean, but it wasn't dirty either, just still. Silas joked that it looked staged, too untouched, like a film set that had been abandoned halfway through. We both laughed, but it didn't feel funny. I went to the desk. It had one drawer that wouldn't budge at first, swollen wood. I got it open by wedging my glove underneath and rocking it gently. Inside were 6 matchbooks, a canvas map folded neatly, and a receipt from Murdoch Supply, a feed store I'd never heard of, located in Wexler, dated exactly 15 years ago, down to the day. The map wasn't like Silas's. It had trails inked by hand, not the clean cuts of old logging roads, but winding paths, almost like someone had walked them and drawn them afterward. Some were labeled with initials, just single letters. When I asked if anything like it had turned up on the site where he pulled the plat, he gave a slow shake of his head. That was the first time I saw uncertainty in his face. Then something fell behind us. It wasn't loud, more like a soft drop, like fabric or paper. We turned at the same time. Nothing was out of place. But when I looked back at the desk, the drawer was closed. I hadn't touched it. I know that for sure. Silas hadn't either. He was still standing by the stove. I opened it again. Empty. The matchbooks, the map, the receipt, all gone. I checked my coat, my pockets, my bag. Nothing. Silas didn't believe me until he opened the drawer himself. Still empty. He started searching the cot, the stove, even the corners where the floor dipped. Nothing. He muttered, "Let's just come back later with a decent camera." I agreed. Neither of us wanted to say we were spooked, but we were definitely not feeling the vibe anymore. When we turned to leave, the door was shut. Neither of us had touched it. I tried the handle. It resisted at first, like something heavy was leaning against it on the other side. Then it gave. Opened right up and right up. Outside, The sun had dipped behind the trees, and everything had that cold blue look. Worse, our boot prints leading up to the cabin were gone. It was just smooth snow, flat and undisturbed. We headed downhill, retracing our steps. The four-wheeler wasn't where we left it. There weren't even tracks, no drag marks. Just the rectangular imprint where the tires had sat and a little ridge of packed snow where the chains had compressed it. Silas said maybe we'd gone too far down the wrong side of the ridge. We climbed back up to the fork, then tried the other path. Still nothing. We argued, low and clipped. I wanted to keep walking until we hit the road. He wanted to go back to the cabin and wait for daylight. I didn't want to go near it again. But the cold had started cutting through my clothes, and one of the thermoses had cracked in my bag, soaking through everything. We walked for a long time. Eventually, we reached the same bend again, and the cabin was there. The door was open wider this time. Not how we left it. We stood there for a while, not speaking, just standing. Eventually, we went back in. There wasn't a better choice. The drawer was open again. The map was back. But now the initials were circled in red ink. One more had been added at the bottom, S&M, S&M, hours. On the back, in my handwriting, was tomorrow's date, February 3rd. Silas stepped away from the desk like it might bite him. He tried the stove again. The pipe was intact. He reached near the grate and jerked his hand back. It was warm. There was no wood in the box. No sign of fire. But you could feel that faint leftover heat, like someone had used it an hour ago. We didn't talk after that. Just sat on the floor with our backs against the wall. He drifted off first, twitching in his sleep. I fought it for as long as I could, but my thoughts started fraying. I blinked and felt time skip. Like whole minutes were missing. When I looked again, Silas was gone. I panicked, called his name. Nothing. The stove was cold now, drawer empty. I ran outside shouting. No prints. Not his. Not mine. Just snow. I circled the cabin and found him behind it, standing stiff with his arms at his sides, staring into the trees. His eyes were open, but his face was blank. When I grabbed his shoulder, he flinched like he'd been shocked. Said he saw a light out there. Tried to point, but there was nothing. He said he hadn't moved. I checked. No tracks behind him. I told him we were done. We were leaving, even if we had to guess the way. We didn't speak again. We started walking, turning back every few steps to keep the cabin in view. After a while, it disappeared. Then we saw it again, closer. Curtains now covered the window beside the door. There hadn't been curtains before. Silas muttered, "I think we've already done this." I didn't answer. My hands were shaking, my lips numb. We picked a line and kept walking. Eventually, we hit flat ground. I saw a rusted sign in the snow, condemned, faint county emblem at the bottom. Past that, the tire tracks reappeared, and the four-wheeler was sitting exactly where we left it, frosted over but untouched. We got on. We didn't talk. We didn't look back. I haven't seen Silas since that winter. He moved down south, won't say where, changed his number. We were chasing this half-baked photography project, documenting forgotten buildings out in the Appalachian foothills, mostly Central Carolina, dipping into parts of Tennessee and Georgia when the roads allowed. We weren't trying to get published or anything. Lennox, my friend, had this idea about lost spaces, and we just sort of rolled with it. It gave us an excuse to get out of town, hike through dead leaves, and feel like we were doing something cooler than sitting at our desks. Lennox handled most of the research. He'd spend evenings digging through land surveys and tax archives. I drove, climbed fences, and carried the tripod. That was my role. It was about a week before Christmas when he flagged a house outside Redfern County Way, out past the last marked road, maybe a half hour off pavement. The coordinates pointed to a plot boxed in by woods, and the place hadn't shown up on any of the standard assessor maps since the late 70s. Getting there was slow. We had to snake along this old gravel fire road that felt more like a hiking path than anything meant for a vehicle. It narrowed into overgrowth within the first mile. Eventually, we just parked and hiked the rest of the way in, pushing through brambles and ducking under tree limbs that had clearly been left untouched for decades. The cold was brutal. No snow, but the ground felt like sheet metal, just frozen solid under a thin crust of dry mud. We kept our gloves on the whole hike, which took about 40 minutes. At some point, the roofline finally came into view through a break in the brush. The house was sunken low in the gully, half swallowed by overgrowth. A steep tin roof, thick stone base, and the kind of design that suggested it had been built by hand. No visible tracks. No broken beer bottles. No old fire pits. It didn't look like anyone had been there in decades, not even curious teenagers. That alone made me uneasy. Most of the other places we found had been tagged or trashed, at least a little. This one? It looked like people had actively chosen not to go near it. Lennox stayed outside to sketch the floor plan and note architectural details, which he was always more into than I was. I circled the side and climbed around the sagging edge of the porch to get inside. One of the doors was hanging crooked, but I was able to push through. The place was definitely old, but surprisingly intact. The parlor floor dipped alarmingly, so I avoided that, but the rest of the house held together. No signs of collapse or animal nests. It even still had furniture, a few wooden chairs, a scuffed table buried under brittle newspapers, a half-destroyed dresser in the back. One of those rooms where you instantly forget what year it is. I started taking shots, wide angles first, then zooming in on textures, peeling paint, rusted hinges, the kind of decay you only get with time and silence. I'd just finished framing the corner of the kitchen when I heard this faint sound behind me. A knock. Just one, soft, like someone rapping a knuckle against the wall. I turned around fast, but nothing had moved. No wind, no animal tracks. The kitchen floor was dry and clean. I waited a second, listening. Nothing. Told myself it was the wood shifting from the cold. That's the kind of logic you lean on when you're deep in the middle of nowhere and standing in someone else's ruin. When I turned back to the kitchen, though, one of the chairs was different. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even been near it, but it had moved, just a few inches. It had been tucked neatly under the table, and now it was slightly angled out, like someone had stood up from it and forgotten to push it back in. I froze for a second, waiting for some rustling or another sound, but everything was dead still. I snapped the photo anyway and kept moving. The back room was mostly empty, just a splintered bed frame and that broken dresser. When I stepped in, the drawers were hanging open. Two of them tipped out at weird angles like a crooked grin. I set the camera on the windowsill to switch out lenses. Took maybe 30 seconds. When I turned back around, the drawers were shut. All of them. Perfectly aligned. I hadn't touched them. I'm sure of that. They'd been too far gone anyway, swollen with damp, warped with time. But now, they were closed like they'd never been disturbed. I tried to pull one open just to see, and it wouldn't budge. The wood was solid, unmoving, locked by time. I stepped back out to the hall and looked through one of the gaps in the shutters. Lennox was still outside, waving from the far edge of the yard. I gave him a quick thumbs up. Didn't want to spook him with whatever weird vibes were circling. I was about to call it, but something made me go upstairs. I wanted a few shots of the attic. The steps were built right into the wall, more like a vertical crawl than a staircase, narrow, steep, but sturdy. I climbed up slowly, one hand on either wall. The attic was just one long room. No insulation, just beams, boards, and a single trunk shoved in the far corner. I remember crouching next to it, lining up my shot and noticing something that didn't add up. The trunk wasn't where it had been. When I first saw it, it had been pressed right into the corner, tucked against the wall. Now it was off-center. Not by much, maybe 4 or 5 inches, but enough to make me pause. The floor wasn't sloped, there was no draft. Nothing that should have made it slide. I reached out to touch it and immediately pulled my hand back. The wood was freezing, way colder than anything else in the room. It felt unnatural, like it had been stored in ice. I stood up slowly and turned toward the stairwell. Gone, just flat wall. No steps, no mount holes, nothing. Just unbroken drywall like no one had ever carved stairs into that space. I didn't move. I just stood there trying to find some part of the wall that made sense. Some evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. But there wasn't even a shadow where the steps had been. I hadn't imagined them. I remembered the feel of the wood, the angle, how I braced myself coming up. Then I heard it. A slow drag, like cardboard sliding over floorboards. I turned, and the trunk was no longer in the corner. It was dead center now, perfectly aligned, perfectly placed. And the broken latch? Gone. That was the only time I let panic kick in. I didn't look at it again. I ran to the wall where the stairs had been and started kicking, slamming my boots into it. The wood cracked after a few hits. I forced my foot through and started tearing at it with my hands. My fingers caught a gap behind the drywall, and I pried it wide enough to fit through. Then I dropped. Maybe 6 feet, landed hard on my left ankle. It rolled, and I hit the floor with a thud that echoed through the house. The camera bounced off somewhere behind me. I didn't even look for it. I got up, half-hopping, and shoved the back door open. Yelled for Lennox. He was already halfway down the trail, clearly rattled. He'd heard the crash and thought the house had collapsed on me. I told him I slipped, that I didn't want to talk about it. We barely spoke on the way back. I kept watching the trees behind us through the mirror. Not because I thought something was following us, but because I was scared we might see the house again. That somehow we'd loop back to that same gravel road. Back in town, I plugged in the camera to back up the shots. Everything was there, kitchen, hallway, parlor, but the attic sequence, gone. The next week, Lennox emailed me another location, a mill house near the Virginia line. I didn't even open it, just replied and said I was done. My cousin Nash had just turned 16. That winter break, he decided we were going on one of his expeditions, which was his way of saying we're going to trespass somewhere spooky for fun. He lived with his folks out near Barlow Ridge in southern West Virginia, where the land just keeps climbing into the woods until it stops caring about fences. Every December we'd visit for the holidays, and every time, Nash found some new way to get in trouble. That year was no different. Except this time, he wanted company. "You ever been to the ridgeline?" he asked, digging through a crate in the garage, already stuffing his pack with flashlights, batteries, and a half-eaten bag of beef jerky. I shook my head. "There's a house way up there. Old farmhouse. Nobody's touched it in decades. I saw it from the drone last month." He looked up at me, eyes wide like he was offering treasure. "You in?" I wish I'd lied. The snow had started falling that morning. Just a soft drift at first, the kind that makes you think, hey, we've got time. By the time we layered up and left, it had started to come down harder, but not enough to stop Nash. Nothing ever was. We had hiking boots, snacks, 2 flashlights, and his phone fully charged. My phone didn't even have signal out there, so it mostly stayed off. We followed a narrow deer trail that wound through the woods like a string pulled tight across trees. At first, it felt like a regular hike, cold, quiet, kind of pretty in that dead winter way. But after about an hour, the woods started to thin and the snow got heavier. The trail turned into something more like a suggestion than a path. Then the trees broke open, and there it was. The house looked like it was melting into the hillside. 2 stories of sagging wood and rotted planks, half painted in the kind of white that had given up a long time ago. The porch dipped in the middle like it was exhaling. Windows were either shattered or missing altogether, just dark, gaping rectangles looking back at us. I stopped walking. Nash didn't. "Come on," he said, laughing as he climbed the porch rail. "It's just wood and wind." I wasn't so sure. The place looked like it should have collapsed 20 years ago. The front door was hanging by one hinge. It didn't even squeak, it just sort of swung open like it had been waiting for us. No resistance, no drama, just an open mouth. Inside was wrong. It wasn't the usual spooky house vibe you expect from movies. There were no groans or settling beams. It was quiet in a way I'd never felt before, like sound didn't work in there, like everything got swallowed before it reached your ears. The cold was heavier somehow. Our boots crunched over frost that coated the floorboards in a thin, even layer. We didn't talk much, just walked through the downstairs in silence. The kitchen was gutted. One of the cabinet doors hung open, and inside was a single spoon, like someone had left in the middle of breakfast 50 years ago and never came back. Upstairs was worse. The walls were stripped bare, insulation poking out like spiderwebs soaked in oil. One of the bedrooms had a cracked mirror nailed to the wall, reflecting our flashlight beams like dull coins. In the corner of the room sat a wooden toy chest, tiny, like it belonged in a dollhouse. I opened it. Nothing. It looked empty. I mean, absolutely nothing. Pitch black. It was like staring into a well. Something about the way the darkness sat inside it felt wrong. Too deep for such a small box. I closed the lid slowly. "Anything in there?" Nash asked. "Nope." We moved on. Then he stopped. Far end of the hallway, in a room with no furniture, no glass in the windows, just bare bones. He was staring at the far wall. There was a drawing. Not framed, not on paper, drawn onto the wall. Like someone had taken crayons and gone to work straight on the wood. It was childlike, sloppy. A bunch of stick figures, but all of them wrong. One had red scribbles where the head should have been. Another had arms that reached the floor. One didn't have feet, just stumps where the legs ended. Beneath them, a line of writing. Only it didn't look like writing I recognized. Not English, not even letters. More like symbols scratched deep into the wall. Nash leaned in. "Probably squatters," he said. "Or kids screwing around." Still, he took a picture. The flash didn't work, just blinked and died. So he turned on his flashlight and aimed it at the wall, and that's when we saw it. Another drawing underneath, faint, like someone had drawn over it with heavier crayon, but the old image still clung to the wood. More figures, a lot more. Some were circled. Some were crossed out entirely, almost carved into the wall. I told him we should leave. The snow outside was thick now, and we'd already been out longer than planned. He looked at me, distracted. "Hang on," he said, stepping into the hallway. "There's a trapdoor here." I followed him to where the floorboards didn't match. A square panel with a rusted ring embedded in the wood. He pulled it open. No stairs, just a hole and the dark. "Looks like a root cellar," he said. "There's something down there." "Furniture, a chair or something." "Yeah," I said. "But how would we get back up?" He didn't answer. Before I could say another word, he had one leg in, then disappeared. I waited at the edge, holding the flashlight, calling his name. He didn't answer at first. Then his light blinked again. I heard him muttering something, muffled. Not like he was far away, but like he was speaking through fabric, like something was over his mouth. I leaned closer. "They're not drawn," he said quietly. "They're carved." Then nothing. The light went out. I shouted for him. No sound came back. I pulled out my phone. No bars. No GPS. Just me, crouched on the floor above a black hole that now felt like it wanted me there too. Then something moved. A dragging sound across the wood. Sharp. Fast. Nails, maybe. I scrambled backward. My flashlight beam flicked across the trap door and froze. A hand. Just resting on the edge, not reaching, not grabbing, just there. The skin looked like stone, gray, brittle. The nails were split, curling back like dried leaves. It didn't move. It didn't have to. I ran. I didn't think. Just bolted back through the upstairs hall, down the steps, through the open door, and into the snow. My legs were shaking. My breath felt like knives. I don't remember how long I ran. Just that, eventually, the trees opened up, and I saw the faint yellow spot where we'd stepped off the trail. I didn't stop until I saw the outline of Nash's house. I slammed through the back door screaming. His mom nearly dropped a bowl of green beans. They called the county sheriff. Then search and rescue. I told them everything, even the part about the hand. They nodded. Took notes. Didn't believe me. They found the house. They found the trap door. They found Nash's flashlight, busted in half next to a chair that looked like it had been there since the Depression. But Nash? Gone. They searched for days. Dogs, drones, volunteers. No sign of Nash. My uncle had asked me to house sit for him while he spent the winter down in Naples, Florida. His place was up near Northridge, way out in the kind of area where neighbors meant someone you waved to once a month if you happened to be outside at the same time. The house sat on this frostbitten road about 3 miles past a busted-up gas station and a small clapboard church that hadn't held a service in at least a decade. After that, there was nothing. Just dense woods, winding dirt roads, and snow that stuck around long enough to make you question how badly you really needed to go into town. After a couple weeks, I was starting to get this strange kind of cabin fever. Not the manic kind, just a low, itchy boredom that made me start replying to Facebook posts I'd usually scroll past. That's how I ended up reconnecting with Marcus. We'd met through some mutual friends a few years earlier. He was into photography, the moody, black and white kind. Broken windows, abandoned chairs, that whole aesthetic. He'd been posting pictures of decaying barns and forgotten houses around the area, and I guess I commented on one. He messaged me the same day asking if I wanted to tag along next time he went exploring. Said he'd found a place he couldn't stop thinking about. I told him I was free later that week. We met at this old diner in Ashridge on a Tuesday morning. One of those places with cracked leather booths and a menu that hadn't changed since the 80s. He ordered black coffee and pancakes. I got eggs and toast. We didn't talk much at first, just that kind of aimless catching up you do when you're not sure if the other person remembers things the same way you do. Then he pulled out his camera bag and we headed out. It was a quiet drive. We took Route 12 east, then turned off onto a side road that wasn't marked except for a leaning mailbox with no house in sight. Snow crunched under the tires, and the trees on either side of the road looked like someone had spray painted them white. I noticed something strange the deeper we went. There weren't any tire tracks but ours. Not recent ones anyway, just a lot of overgrown driveways and empty mailboxes leaning toward the road like tired old men. Marcus finally stopped near a rusted gate that didn't seem to lead anywhere. We parked and got out. The air was sharp, biting. I remember the smell of pine and that dry electric feel the cold has when it sinks into your nose. He pointed to a break in the trees and said, "It's just through there." It wasn't a path really, just a worn line in the brush. We hiked for maybe 5 minutes. My boots were soaked by the time we reached the ridge. That's when I saw it. The house was set low in the clearing, almost sunken into the slope. A narrow 2-story structure, boxy, plain, and quiet. It didn't jump out at you. It just appeared, the way a bruise shows up under the skin. The windows were just dark, gaping holes. The front door looked like someone had tried to pry it off with a crowbar and gave up halfway through. It hung crooked in the frame, pushed in at the bottom like something had leaned hard against it. The steps up to the porch groaned loud. I remember that clearly. Marcus was already filming. He had this little handheld rig with a stabilizer that made him look like he was walking through a movie set. He pushed open the door and we went inside. It was colder in there than it had been outside. I could see my breath and the air smelled wrong. Not just musty, there was something else. A burnt plastic kind of sharpness, like the inside of an old TV right after it fries. The layout was simple. One main room with a dining table and some leftover furniture, but nothing was where it should have been. The table was intact and the chairs were all tucked in neatly, but the backs of the chairs were gouged. 4 deep scratches running down each one. Same pattern, same spacing. Like claws, but too clean, almost mechanical. Marcus barely noticed. He was already heading toward the stairs, camera in one hand, flashlight in the other. I hesitated, then followed him up. The stairs bowed under our weight, but didn't creak. That's what stuck out to me, how quiet they were, like someone had oiled them recently. The second floor had 2 rooms. One was completely empty except for a twin bed frame. The other had a broken crib shoved into the corner. I stepped into that one. There were pencil markings on the wall, circles, dozens of them, each one carefully drawn, all the same size. I leaned in close. They weren't messy or frantic. They were obsessive. counted, maybe. No words, just circles, over and over again, across nearly the entire wall. I was still staring when Marcus called out to me from the other room. His voice didn't sound normal. He was trying to whisper, but it had this sharp, forced edge, like something in his throat was stopping him. I crossed the hall and found him kneeling on the floor, holding something in his hands. It was a baby monitor, the kind with a plastic antenna and a yellowed cord, definitely from the 80s. No batteries, no plug, but it was humming with soft static, just a faint, broken hiss, like someone breathing in a different room. He looked up and laughed. Creepy, right? I told him to shut it off. He shook his head. It's not even on. I was about to say something else, but I stopped. The doorway behind him, something about it had changed. The angle, the placement. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it wasn't the same doorway we'd walked through 2 minutes earlier. It felt closer, tighter, like the house was folding in on itself. Marcus stood up and we headed back downstairs. That's when I counted the steps again. There had been 8 when we came up. Now there were 12. I stopped halfway and looked back. He didn't notice, just kept walking. At the bottom, the front door was shut, fully latched. Neither of us had touched it. The knob wouldn't turn. The frame had swollen like the wood was breathing. We circled the main floor looking for a way out, and that's when I noticed the curtains. Every window, which had been wide open when we got there, now had a red velvet curtain pulled across it. Thick, heavy fabric. No dust, no fading. Not from this house. Not from any house like this. Marcus looked around and said, "All right, seriously, are you screwing with me?" I shook my head. I wasn't touching anything. I grabbed one of the curtains and tried to pull it aside. It didn't move. Not even a millimeter. I tugged harder. Nothing. It felt like it had been nailed directly into the wall. That's when the sound started. A dull thump from upstairs. Then another. Then another. Slow, steady, like someone in boots walking from one side of the room to the other. Marcus grabbed a piece of pipe from the floor. I don't even know where it came from. He held it like a bat and told me to stay close. We headed for the stairs again. I didn't want to go up, but there was nowhere else to go. We were halfway when something slid down toward us. A piece of paper, folded clean, crisp corners. It landed on the step between us. Marcus bent down, unfolded it. I told him not to. It was blank inside, just white paper, but there was a single strand of long, black hair caught in the crease. That's when I was done. I grabbed his arm and said we needed to get out. Break a window, bash a door, whatever it took. We ran to the kitchen. He swung the pipe hard at the nearest window. It bounced off. No crack. No sound. Like he'd hit rubber. He swung again. Same thing. I grabbed a chair and hurled it. The moment it touched the glass, it just stopped. Like the air itself had solidified. Then we heard it again. Thump. But this time, it was behind us. We turned. The stairs were empty. And the front door, wide open. Just like that, no creak. No wind. Just open. Marcus bolted. I ran after him. Outside, the snow was deeper than before, up to our knees in spots. And our truck? Gone. No sign of it. No tire tracks. No footprints. Like it had never been there. We didn't talk. Just walked until we found the road. A guy in a plow truck picked us up about 20 minutes later. Said we were 5 miles from where we thought we were. I didn't even try to explain. I was 17 when it happened. There's this old stretch of state road that snakes along the edge of town, just a cracked 2-lane barely clinging to the side of the mountain. It's easy to miss if you're not from here. Most people drive it without thinking twice. But if you grow up in a place like Drift Hollow tucked way down in southern Appalachia, you learn there are some turns you don't take, some hills you don't hike, and some stories that get passed around in half whispers, if they get told at all. People here don't talk much about the hills. There's just this quiet understanding that some parts of them aren't meant to be explored, not because they're dangerous in the normal way, steep cliffs or bears or whatever, but because they're off. Not cursed, Not haunted, nothing dramatic like that, just wrong. And everyone sort of agrees to leave them alone. It was over winter break, and my cousin Beck was staying with us. He's a few months older, a lot louder, and usually the one getting us into weird situations. We'd been stuck inside for nearly a week, snowed in at my grandma's place with nothing but old puzzles, dial-up internet, and enough casseroles to feed a church. By day 5, we were both losing it. So when the weather finally broke and the roads cleared a little, Beck brought up the old Farrell house. The Farrells had lived up past the quarry, tucked way back in the woods. No one really knew them well. They weren't social, didn't come into town much. Then, one year, just gone. No moving trucks, no for sale signs, no explanations. Mail piled up, grass grew tall, and people started talking. Said the house sat wrong. Not haunted, just not quite right. Even the air around it felt weird, according to the few who'd been up that way. Of course, that was enough to get Beck interested. We weren't planning to do anything wild. Just take a look. See if the place was really as weird as people said. So that morning, we layered up in every piece of clothing we owned, filled a couple thermoses with gas station coffee, and set out on foot. We took the back trail behind the old quarry, boots crunching through frozen mud and snow. Took us just under an hour to get there. The house appeared out of nowhere, like it didn't want to be seen until we were right in front of it. It wasn't falling down or anything, just weathered. 2 stories. Porch sagging on the left. Windows intact, but the glass was cloudy, like it hadn't been cleaned in a decade. You could still see curtains through them, swaying a little even though there wasn't any wind. We circled around and tried the back door. It wasn't locked. Beck just pushed it open, and it gave like it had been waiting. Inside, it smelled like old paper, wood rot, and that damp cold that settles in your bones. The kind of cold that doesn't make sense, even when it's snowing outside. Nothing looked broken or vandalized. Everything was just paused. Furniture in place, dishes still stacked on open shelves, boxes piled neatly in corners. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt like the people had stepped out for a moment and just never came back. We walked through the downstairs without talking much, just absorbing it all. In the front hallway, there were these portraits lining the wall. Family photos, same 5 people every time, 2 adults, 3 kids. Same arrangement in every shot. But what got me was that their faces never changed. No aging, no new clothes really. Just slight variations, like someone had made 5 versions of the same photo but forgot to make time move. We headed upstairs. Most of the rooms were empty or filled with stacked furniture and dusty boxes. Then, we found the one with the drawings. Every wall, every surface, covered in kids' drawings. Crayons, hundreds of them. Houses, suns, trees, stick figures holding hands. But every person had a hollow circle where the face should be. No eyes, no mouths. No mouths, just that empty loop. We just stood there. It was quiet, too quiet. Beck made a joke, called it some kid's creepy art phase, but his voice cracked halfway through and he didn't say anything else after that. On the way out, I spotted something that hadn't been there when we arrived. A boot print in the snow. Just one. Clear tread, pointed toward the house, coming from the woods. Beck tried to brush it off, said it was probably one of ours, but it didn't match our prints. And it was too fresh, too clean. That should have been the end of it. But the next day, Beck called up Milo, this friend of his who was into drones and filming abandoned places. Milo was skeptical but agreed to come along, figured he might get some cool footage out of it. We went back around dusk. The air had that heavy, waiting kind of stillness. It wasn't windy, but it felt like the trees were leaning in a little closer. We didn't say much on the hike up, just trudged along in silence, boots crunching, breath fogging. Inside, it felt colder than the day before. My hands went numb just holding my phone. Beck didn't waste time. He was already halfway up the stairs when I noticed something was off. The front hallway looked different. Lighter, fewer frames on the wall. I didn't count, but I felt it. Some of the portraits were missing. When we all met upstairs, I asked Milo to check his drone footage later, see if he caught any shots of the hallway from the first trip. He just shrugged. We went back into the room with the drawings. The walls were still full, but now some of the figures were scratched out. Not erased, violently crossed out, crayon gashes slashing through heads and limbs. One had a black X so deep it had torn the wallpaper. Milo stared for a second, then walked out without a word. That's when it happened. 3 knocks. Heavy, deliberate, from downstairs. We all froze. Not the wind, not an animal. Just 3 solid knocks. Then, dead silence. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. Milo turned to me and whispered, "That wasn't the wind." We bolted. Down the stairs, past the portraits. I didn't even glance this time. I just wanted out. But the back door was dead bolted. From the inside, we never touched it. Beck ran to the front. Same thing. Locked tight. No keys, no way to open it. Milo pulled out his phone. Dead, completely off. I checked mine, nothing. Beck's wouldn't even light up. That's when the panic really hit. We rushed to the kitchen. Beck grabbed the nearest thing, an old metal kettle, and smashed a window. As soon as the glass broke, we heard it. Footsteps. Upstairs. Upstairs. Heavy. Slow. Moving across the floor. We didn't wait. We climbed out one by one, tearing our jackets, scraping our arms. I slipped and almost went down hard, but Milo grabbed me. We didn't look back. We just ran. Straight into the woods. No trail. No plan. Just running. It felt like hours before we found the road again. Beck collapsed in the snow, threw up in the ditch. We sat there, shaking, too tired to talk. A few minutes later, Milo's phone flickered back to life. 3:07 in the morning. We didn't go back. Beck cut his trip short and caught a ride back to Tennessee the next day. Milo footage off his drone got corrupted. Glitches, static, weird loops like the same 10 seconds repeating over and over. It was a couple of days after Christmas, late December, and the roads through Ashlow County still hadn't thawed, just frozen slush and crusty snowbanks stained with mud and exhaust. I was out visiting my cousin Nolan, who'd recently moved back to the family land, way out in the hills where cell reception taps out about 2 miles before you hit his driveway. The kind of place where you can stand on the porch, yell at the sky, and no one hears you but the crows. Nolan and I grew up out there. We spent summers poking around half-collapsed tobacco barns and digging up junk from rusted-out sheds, convinced we'd find treasure. So when he told me about some abandoned farmhouse up near Ash Hill with a root cellar that hadn't caved in, I didn't need convincing. He thought there might still be old tools or jars down there. I figured, why not? We were bored, and the roads were just good enough to drive. We packed a thermos of coffee, threw a few snacks in his truck, and layered up. The air had that sharp, dry cold that makes your nose sting before you've even left the driveway. The trail that led toward the ridge had been a logging road once, but it looked like no one had driven it in years. There were branches across it, patches of ice with just enough dirt underneath to keep your boots from sliding. We had to park at a clearing about halfway up and hike the rest. The house was tucked back in the trees, sitting half sunk into the hillside, like it had been waiting to be forgotten. One of those old Appalachian skeletons, 2 stories, tall windows, porch half eaten by rot, roof sagging like a shrug. From a distance, it looked like it could collapse just from us looking at it too hard. But inside, it was surprisingly solid. Cold and dusty, but the floor didn't creak much, and the walls were still standing. You could tell no one had been living there for decades, but the bones of the place were still there. In the back corner of the main room, there was a trap door. Big, heavy wood, iron hinges. Nolan found it almost immediately and grinned like he'd just won something. "Bet there's stuff still down there," he said, and kicked at it until it popped open. It wasn't locked, just swollen shut with time. He went first. I followed with my flashlight, catching glimpses of frost on the stone walls as we stepped down. The stairs were wood, rough cut and a little warped, but they held. At the bottom, the cellar opened into a narrow rectangle, just tall enough to stand, maybe 15 feet across. Shelves lined 2 of the walls, and in the center was a patch of dirt that looked like it had been dug up and left half covered. Like someone started digging, stopped, and walked off. There was an old shovel stuck in the middle. Nolan tapped it with his boot, then wandered off toward the shelves, humming under his breath. I stayed closer to the wall, brushing frost off the jars. None of them had labels. Some were fogged from the inside. Others had strange things floating in them, knobby roots, little clumps of dark hair, even what looked like a dead bird's foot. One jar was packed solid with tiny, delicate bones. I didn't open any, just looked. It was dead silent down there. No breeze, no hum of appliances, not even the creak of the house above. That kind of stillness that feels a little too complete. Then something clinked behind me. I turned fast, and the shovel had fallen. Flat on the stone floor. I figured Nolan had nudged it, and it took a while to tip over. I called out to him, but didn't hear anything. No response. No footsteps either. That was the first thing that didn't sit right. The cellar wasn't that big. If he was moving around, I'd hear it. I circled the room, checked behind the beams, called his name again, louder this time. Nothing. I stood there for a good minute just listening, trying to hear anything. That's when I heard his voice. Faint, not echoing off the walls. Not coming from the stairs, from the dirt. Not shouting, not even panicked. It sounded like he was having a regular conversation with someone, his voice muffled like he was on the other side of a thick door or wall, just steady, like he was in mid-sentence. I crouched, leaned close to the disturbed dirt, and held my breath. His voice didn't get louder. It didn't shift. It just kept going, level and calm, like he didn't even know I was there. I stood up fast, backed away from the center of the room, and headed straight for the stairs. Nolan wasn't the kind of guy to mess with people, and even if he was, there was nowhere for him to hide. I climbed back up, trying to tell myself maybe he'd gone outside, maybe he was messing around up top and I just missed him. But the snow out front hadn't been touched. Our boot prints were still the only ones, coming in, none going out. I waited. 10 minutes, maybe more. It felt like longer. Then I realized the trap door had closed. Not slammed, just shut. The chain latch dangled loose, not hooked, but the door was sealed tight like someone had pushed it down from inside. I grabbed the handle and pulled. It lifted maybe an inch, then stopped. Like there was weight on top of it. I shoved, pulled again. This time, it came open. And the cellar wasn't the same. The shelves were gone. No jars. No dirt mound. No shovel. The wood stairs we'd just used were now a smooth slope of poured concrete, the kind you'd see in a storm shelter. The floor was dry and empty. I stood there at the top of the steps, staring down at a completely different space than the one I'd just been standing in. Then I closed the door and latched it, without even thinking. I walked the whole house, checked every room. Silence, dust, cold. No Nolan. The snow outside was still undisturbed. I drove back down the ridge and straight into town. Sheriff's office was quiet. A deputy named Harris was on duty. I told him everything, from the hike to the jars to the voice in the dirt. He didn't laugh, didn't interrupt. He just nodded slowly and said, "All right, let's go." We drove back up, got there before dark. Harris had a flashlight, walked with me through the house, down into the cellar. Still concrete, still empty. He wrote down what I said, asked for Nolan's info, and handed me his card. Before I left, he said, "We've had things like this come up before." Not often, but more than you'd think. I didn't press him on that. That night, I stayed at Nolan's place. Cabin out near the tree line, wood stove still warm. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made my chest tighten. Sometime after 2, I heard a knock. Just one. Not loud, not frantic, just firm, clean. Like the sound of knuckles against solid wood. I didn't open the door. Next morning, there was a single boot print in the snow, right in front of the door. Toes pointed straight toward the cabin. I left before noon, haven't been back since. It was winter break, and everything back home felt kind of stale. I needed to be somewhere that didn't feel so heavy, so I drove out to Carson Hollow to spend a few days with my cousin Milo. He lived with his mom in this old house tucked way out past the last paved road, one of those places where you lose signal about 10 minutes before you even get there. They had satellite internet, but barely, and I think that's only because Milo's mom liked to stream baking videos. The house was nestled deep in this little valley, practically swallowed by trees. Their closest neighbor was at least a mile down the road, and past that, you're looking at nothing but forest for miles, just ridgelines and logging trails that no one's maintained in years. I hadn't been back since we were teenagers, messing around with slingshots and stealing warm beers out of the garage fridge. It was quiet in a way that feels good at first, until it starts getting under your skin a little. On the second day, we decided to hike up the ridge behind their property. There were a few old cabins up that way that Milo wanted to show me. He said they used to be coal miner housing, left to rot after the mine closed sometime in the 70s. I don't know what I was expecting. I guess I thought we'd poke around, take some photos, and head back before it got dark. Nothing dramatic. We packed a thermos of coffee, grabbed a flashlight just in case, and set out. There was still snow from earlier in the week. Not fresh, but deep enough to crunch. The sky was clear, and the cold kind of hit you right in the lungs, sharp but not unbearable. The hike up took about 40 minutes. Not a trail exactly, just a suggestion of one, marked by Milo's memory and some faint tire ruts. We eventually reached the cabins, spaced a few dozen yards apart in a crooked line along the slope. 4 of them in total. The first one was basically falling in on itself, a rotted-out skeleton of a building, with the roof mostly gone and one wall leaning inward, like it was bowing out of politeness. The second was more intact, walls still standing, furniture inside, though it looked like it had been through at least 20 winters without any help. Chairs with stuffing spilling out, water-stained wallpaper peeling off like dead skin. It didn't feel creepy, just forgotten. But the third cabin made me stop before I even stepped on the porch. It looked preserved somehow. Not clean, not new, but less ruined. The porch boards didn't sag as much, and weirdly, there wasn't any snow inside, even though the door was long gone. That caught my eye first. Then I noticed the footprints just off to the left of the steps, still visible, pressed into the muddy slush. The edges were soft, but the pattern was clear. Someone had been there not too long before us. I pointed it out, but Milo didn't seem bothered. Probably hunters, he said, or someone camping. We stepped inside anyway. The layout was pretty standard. Narrow hallway down the middle, 2 rooms on one side, kitchen in the back. It smelled like wet wood, old insulation, and something else faint. Maybe mildew, maybe something animal. I couldn't pin it down. We moved into the kitchen. Sink rusted over. One cabinet half off the hinge. A single chair, tipped over in the corner. And then there was the broom. It was standing upright in the far corner, bristles neatly aligned. It looked normal, not brand new, but definitely not something that had been sitting untouched for decades. There was no dust on it, no spider webs. Even stranger, the floor had been swept, not spotless or anything, but cleared in these deliberate arcs like someone had made an effort. You could see the drag lines curving around the debris on the floor. I turned to Milo. "Are you messing with me?" He just laughed, but there was this slight pause before he did. And it wasn't the full-on laugh he'd had earlier. It was quieter, like he didn't want to echo. We left that one and headed to the last cabin. It was smaller, more like a shack, and tucked a little farther into the trees. Only one room and a cellar door out back that was hanging crooked on rusted hinges. There was a mattress on the floor and a couple of blankets in a heap next to it. The blankets looked recently moved. One of them was thick, army green, the kind you get in surplus stores. Way too new looking to have been left there 30 years ago. Milo scanned the room slowly, then muttered, "I don't think we're alone up here." Neither of us moved. I turned toward the window, what was left of it. The glass was cracked and spotted with old grime, but you could still see out to the tree line. Nothing moved. Then we heard it. One step outside. Just a single crunch. Ice cracking underweight. Milo leaned toward the window, trying to see. I didn't move. I stayed completely still, breath stuck in my throat. Another step, closer. We ducked behind what passed for a kitchen counter, just a slab of wood barely standing. Not exactly cover, but it was something. Then came a noise, soft, almost delicate, like fingers brushing against the door frame. Or maybe it was a boot dragging slightly as someone shifted their stance. Milo put his hand on my arm. Didn't say anything, just mouth, "Stay still," and then we heard it. Breathing. It was close. You could hear the rhythm, just faint enough to know it was right outside. A calm, steady inhale and exhale. Footsteps followed. Slow, deliberate, moving just past the doorless opening. They didn't go far, just stopped somewhere nearby, out of sight. My heart felt like it was trying to push through my ribs. I didn't dare look. Minutes passed, or at least they felt like minutes. Then we heard retreating footsteps, soft but steady, moving back in the direction of the third house. And then, nothing. We didn't move for a long time. Eventually, Milo pointed toward the back cellar door. It opened onto a slope behind the cabin, leading down through the woods toward his house. We slipped out quietly and started down. It took forever to get back. We kept stopping every few minutes to listen, just in case we were being followed. I didn't breathe right until we were back inside. Milo locked the door behind us. He never used to bother. Then he disappeared into the back room and came out with a pistol I hadn't seen before. He didn't explain. He didn't have to. The next morning, we went back up. I'm not even sure why. Part curiosity, part denial, maybe. We didn't speak much on the way. The footprints were still there, ours included. But now there were two new sets. One matched our boots, looping again around the third cabin and heading to the fourth. The other was barefoot, not sock prints. Bare feet. In the snow. You could see the shape of toes. We stared at them in silence. Then we turned around and left. I caught a ride home the day after that. Neither of us mentioned it again. Milo never brought it up, and I never asked. I was 33 when I agreed to finish out the week alone on Ridley Ridge. The second cabin had zero insulation. I had to jam plastic grocery bags into the window frames to keep the drafts out. Real professional setup. I was sleeping in the storage bunkhouse, barely heated, but it had a cot, a stove, and an old crank radio that could sometimes catch weather updates from over in Parkford if I angled the antenna just right. There are 5 cabins on the ridge, all lined up to face the slope. They were booked solid through New Year's. I didn't mind the quiet first day went by easy. Cleared the trail, swapped out propane tanks, patched some mesh over the chimney vents. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then came day 2. I was dropping fire starter kits at each cabin when I noticed someone in cabin 4. Through the front window, I saw a woman just standing there, mid-40s maybe. Pale, short gray hair, heavy coat, one of those older quilted ones you don't see much anymore. She didn't wave or say anything, just watched me from behind the glass. I gave a quick nod, kept walking, but I felt her eyes the whole way up the steps. That cabin wasn't booked. I double-checked the clipboard back at the bunkhouse just to be sure. First scheduled guest wasn't due till Friday. I called Ethan, thinking maybe someone from the Owners Association came up early or a last-minute booking slipped through. He said no. Nobody had the lockbox codes except staff. Probably a mix-up, he told me. Maybe a guest showed up early and got the code from a friend. He sounded half asleep. Said if it spooked me, I could change the lock code. So I did, that night. Next morning, I hiked down to the old creek bed to check a water line. When I came back, there were footprints. Fresh ones, bare feet. They circled the bunkhouse in a perfect little loop. Just one tight ring right around the door. No tracks leading up or away, no shoes, just clear, human-shaped prints in the snow. Toes, heel, repeat. Always pointing inward like someone had been walking in circles facing the door. I just stood there staring for a while, trying to make it make sense. I hadn't heard anything overnight. The stove in that place is loud enough that if someone was crunching around outside, I should have heard it. That night, I slid the crossbar into place on the inside of the door. Not the best security, but it made me feel better. I barely slept. Around 2, the wind just dropped off completely, dead quiet. And that's when I started hearing it. Slow, uneven steps in the snow. Then silence. Then again, I got up twice to peek through the blinds. Nothing. I left the lights on. By the 3rd day, the snow was deeper, and I spent most of the morning hauling salt bags to the steep bend in the trail. When I passed cabin 4 again, the front door was wide open, just swinging slow, like it had been that way for a while. I called out, knocked on the frame. Nothing. Inside, the stove was warm. The bed was messy. There was a glass of water on the nightstand, half full, but no coat, no boots, no food. It looked like someone was staying there but didn't plan to stay long. I backed out, locked the door, tried calling Ethan again, but the signal on that side of the ridge was useless. That night I didn't even bother getting undressed, slept in my coat. The stove burned out too fast, and the air inside felt colder than outside. Just before dawn, the radio switched off the weather station and started hissing with static. I figured I bumped it in my sleep. When I leaned over to fix the dial, I caught something in the corner of my eye. A face, pressed right up against the window, not watching pressed, like cheek, lips, nose smashed flat against the glass. Eyes wide open, not blinking. I jumped so hard I knocked over the damn radio, smacked into the stove. By the time I got to the window, it was empty, but the glass had a smudge on the inside. Same shape as a face. I didn't even make coffee that morning. Packed a bag, wrote a quick note for Ethan in case he showed up, and hiked down to the truck at the bottom of the ridge. Battery was dead. The emergency junk kit I kept in the back? Gone. I circled the lot thinking maybe someone had tampered with it, but there was nothing. No tracks. No signs of anyone else around. Just snow and cold. So I hiked back up. Tried the landline in the shed, no dial tone, completely dead. From then on, I flipped my schedule, slept during the day, stayed alert at night. More face smudges showed up. First just 1, then 2. One morning I found one on the inside of the door. I hadn't opened it. I moved into cabin 2. Thicker walls, better locks. Left the bunkhouse key on the table. I told myself I was just being cautious. But a few days later I went back, just once, just to check. Maybe I imagined it all. Maybe I was overtired. The bunkhouse door was wide open. Inside, the radio was on, but not on any station I recognized. Some faint, whispery voice underneath the static. I leaned in, trying to catch it. Sounded like a name, not mine. I turned it off. When I looked up, she was outside. Same woman, same coat, same face. No footprints. No footprints. I locked the bunkhouse and walked away. Didn't go back. By Christmas Eve, the snow had blocked the main road completely. I still had food, wood, and a beat-up .22 I borrowed from the shed. I stayed holed up in cabin 2, kept the curtains closed, blocked every door. Nothing happened that night. Next morning was quiet too. Then, right after lunch, I heard knocking. Not on the door, on the outside wall, the one that faced straight down the slope. There's no ledge, nothing to stand on. 3 slow knocks, then nothing, then 3 more. I didn't move, didn't answer, just sat there holding my breath. An hour later, I heard steps, not outside, on the roof, one slow crunch at a time, like she was pacing. She never came to the windows again. The next morning, I found my radio on the front mat. The one I dropped, tuning dial was twisted back to static. But this time, I heard my name. That was it for me. I packed up what I could carry, hiked out across the frozen creek, and made it 6 miles down to the ranger station. Told them I'd gotten snowed in and needed a tow. That's all I said. I didn't know how to explain the rest. Ethan swore everything was normal when he came back. No unlocked doors. He said cabin 4's guest had canceled because of the storm, and that the lockbox hadn't been touched. I handed over the keys. Now I rent a 3rd floor walk-up in the city. No windows on the back wall, no radios. If someone knocks, I always check the peephole first. I only opened the door if I recognized the voice. I was 20 when this happened, between semesters and feeling kind of stuck in a rut. That weird in-between time where everything in town felt too familiar, but I didn't have the energy to make any big changes either. So when this guy, Roger, offered me a few $100 to watch his cabin up north, it honestly sounded like the perfect excuse to get out of my own head for a bit. He was probably in his late 50s, wiry build, the kind of guy who kept glancing over his shoulder even when nothing was happening. I remember he had one of those voices that always sounded like it was just a little hoarse. We got to talking while I was finishing up his car, and when I mentioned I didn't have any big plans for winter break, he asked if I'd be willing to keep an eye on his family's cabin. Said it was just outside a place called Ellenville, way up in the pines, and he'd be gone for a month or so. All he wanted was someone to check the pipes, keep the place from looking abandoned, that kind of thing. I said sure. Figured I'd bring some books, maybe reset a bit. He scribbled directions on the back of an old takeout receipt and handed me a heavy ring of keys. No signal up there, he warned, tapping his finger against the paper. But the power works, water's on, and the heater does the job. It took me almost 3 hours to find the place. The last stretch barely qualified as a road, just a couple deep ruts curling through woods thick with spruce. The cabin itself was low and wide, with dull green siding and a slouching porch out back. It looked like it had been sitting there a long time, just waiting to sink into the trees. There were still boot prints around the porch, probably his. The air smelled like damp cedar and cold metal. Not unpleasant, just old. I was only planning to stay a few nights at a time, come back to town if it got boring. The first 2 days were peaceful. I read a lot, ate mostly canned stuff and instant noodles. Hiked out toward the ridge when I needed signal, though even that was spotty. I didn't see another car, another person, or even smoke from another chimney, which was kind of the whole point, honestly. It was the third night that started feeling off. I'd stepped outside with an old tin can of coffee grounds. Snow was falling again, light, soft flakes barely sticking. I turned toward the edge of the drive and stopped. There were footprints in the snow. Not boots like Roger's or mine. These were small, shallow impressions, thin-soled. Dress shoes, maybe. The kind someone would wear to an office or a funeral, not out in the woods. They came from the tree line, curved around the porch steps, and stopped dead in front of the cabin door. That was it, no return path. Just came up and ended. I stared at them for probably a full minute before the cold crept into my fingers. My first thought was that maybe I just missed the person. Maybe they passed by while I had the radio on, or I'd been in the back room and didn't hear. But the prints were so clean, so fresh. I looked around. The woods were still. Even the snow felt too quiet. I went back in and locked the door, both locks. The bolt clicked louder than usual. That night, I barely slept. Every time the heater hummed or settled, I jolted awake. By morning, the prints were mostly buried, just faint outlines under the surface, like someone had pressed down with a warm hand that hadn't quite cooled. Still no car tracks, no new prints, no signs of anyone being up there besides me. I hiked down to the gas station in town just to use the landline. Called Roger's number, got 2 rings, and then silence. I left a message, kept it casual. Just asked if anyone else might be stopping by the place, even though I already knew the answer. The hike back was longer. Sun was going down by the time I made it to the cabin. I had picked up a few things at the station: soup, crackers, a paperback, and some firewood I probably overpaid for. As I stepped onto the porch, something caught my eye. Thin marks had been scraped into the siding. 4 or 5 parallel lines, almost like claw marks but narrower. They started from the back corner of the cabin and dragged forward, ending near the window beside the front door. They weren't deep, just long, fresh. I opened the door slowly, half expecting to find things tossed around, but everything looked exactly how I'd left it. No broken glass, no open drawers. I shut every curtain, left every light on. I told myself I'd leave in the morning. I wasn't scared exactly. I just didn't have a good reason to stay anymore. I packed most of my stuff before bed, set the flashlight next to my pillow. Sometime around 2 in the morning, I heard a click, not loud, just a soft mechanical click. It was the radio. The little portable shelf near the heater had turned on by itself. I hadn't touched it. There was no timer or alarm on it. The volume was low, but I could hear something. A voice maybe? Far away, muffled. Not music. Not music. Not static. Just a low, steady voice talking like it was mid-conversation. I got up, walked over, and switched it off. 2 seconds later, everything shut down. The lights, the heater, the fridge, gone. No flicker, no warning, just total silence. I grabbed the lantern and checked the fuse box. Every switch looked fine. Nothing tripped. I closed the panel and turned around. The front door was open, not wide. Just enough. 3 inches, maybe 4. Just cracked open like someone had tried to slip inside without making a sound. The chain was still swinging. I stood there with the lantern held out in front of me, trying to hear anything, breathing, snow shifting, anything. But it was dead silent. The cold was sliding in slow and steady through the gap. I stepped over and pushed the door shut, locked it. Then dragged the little table in front of it just for good measure. I sat in the corner with the lantern on and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At first light I left. Didn't even eat breakfast. Just shoved everything into my pack, pulled the curtains closed, and locked the cabin behind me. I checked the snow out front, only my boots this time. Nothing else. I didn't stop until I hit Route 40.